With Season 3 drawing to a close, I can finally answer that question of whether Polaris Lance is better than Graviton Lance. I've used both guns extensively, and neither have really left my inventory when it comes to the competitive playlist or just playing in general. Before I get into statistical breakdowns of either gun, let me tell you the history of both weapons. To start, the Graviton Lance was a story mode reward that you got for, just progressing through the story. You got it very early on, and it wasn't the most optimal choice. In fact, I would argue that it was one of the worst weapons in the entire game. The way the original Graviton Lance worked is that it shot a burst of 3 bullets, and the third, final bullet did most of the damage. While this is obviously not as efficient as a standard pulse rifle which has equal damage per bullet in a burst, the Graviton Lance had a trade-off of no range drop-off on the third bullet, and if you got a kill, it created a void explosion, but the problem was the void explosion wasn't very consistent. It still isn't as consistent, but it is significantly better. To put it in perspective, the Graviton Lance was such a joke weapon in the beginning of Destiny that me and my fire team of 6 all put it on and rolled with it in Iron Banner with the goal of getting some explosion kills. Here's the result.
First engagement. Yo,
Firing
this is
squad.
Oh,
Ready.
Ready.
Launch.
On the right side. Yo, that guy got deleted.
Oh, he has a snipe. It's an Aachen.
Throwing an arc bolt.
Donut,
right
Aachen.
Make ready.
I'll watch the right side, guys.
Aim. We're just gonna keep shooting that angle.
Left.
Enjoy the empowering rift.
Left.
In
He's
the
coming
air.
left. He's coming left. He's coming
Guys,
left.
to our very
Right
close
here,
left. Very close
right
left.
here.
He did it to us.
Oh
He's recording that.
no! He's absolutely recording that, dude. We're gonna see that in some montage.
Yeah. I'm being like, wow, that's so insane, dude.
So while the Graviton Lance did have humble beginnings, it got buffed significantly in Season 3. Almost every single aspect of the gun was improved. So in other words, it went from one of the worst guns in the entire game to arguably the best gun in the entire game. And just when people thought it couldn't get any better, the Faction Rallies released with a method to obtain the catalyst for the Graviton Lance, which increased its range, and as we all know in Destiny, range ties to much more than just damage drop-off. And the reason that I say it's one of the best in the game is because it's one of the easiest to use. But easiest to use doesn't always mean best to use, and this is where I want to talk about Polaris Lance. Now this gun, it was introduced in the Warmind DLC. To obtain the Polaris Lance, you had to go through a easy, although time-gated quest to unlock both the gun and its catalyst. Now initially, of course, the gun isn't that flashy. The community reception of the gun isn't that great. It's just a meh reward. But I mean, for a player starting off in the Warmind DLC, that's a pretty good get, especially for PvE. But when put through the lens of a veteran PvP player, as long as you can land headshots, you can tear people up. And that's where this gun starts to shine, is when you can aim, the gun has a lot more value. Maybe even more value than a Graviton Lance. And that's what we're looking into today with today's video. Starting off the weapon comparison strong, we'll start with the stat that most people value, time to kill. On the left we have Graviton Lance with a 1 second time to kill, and on the right we have Polaris Lance with a 1.2 second time to kill. While 0.2 seconds doesn't seem like that big of a difference, it could feel like a lifetime to some individuals in a gunfight. But don't get too hung up on the time to kill because Polaris Lance does something special that we'll talk about later. For now, let's pay attention to the headshot body shot requirement. For those unfamiliar with resilience, that's the amount of health that your Guardian has, and you can change this stat by using armor mods, at least currently in Season 3. For those running under 5 resilience, the Graviton Lance can kill you with 2 headshot bursts and 1 body shot burst. But unlike the original Graviton Lance, it doesn't shoot a burst of 3 bullets, it now shoots a burst of 2 bullets. And trust me, landing 2 bullets is a lot easier than landing 3. Now on the other side, talking about Polaris Lance, it requires 4 shots to kill. 2 headshots and 2 body shots if they're less than 7 resilience. And keep in mind, to get that high of resilience, you have to purposely spec into it. You don't just accidentally get 7. The crazy thing about this headshot body shot combination is it's very similar to a hand cannon, a very popular hand cannon that people use called the Dire Promise. The only difference is Polaris Lance is a scout rifle, so it has very long zoom and it's very hard to track a close range target. But it can be done, it can be practiced, and it can be learned. I also have to mention that the Polaris Lance shoots a single projectile, it's 1 bullet, and Graviton shoots a burst of 2. So although it's, pretty easy to maintain a burst of 2 bullets, it's even easier to maintain a single bullet. Now, while neither gun has an issue when it comes to range, it's still worth talking about because of the differences between a scout rifle and a 2-burst pulse. For Graviton Lance, at 58 meters it experiences a slight drop off in the first bullet damage, which amounts to making a 3-tap impossible on medium resilience. But at those extreme ranges, a 4-tap isn't bad. It's still very competitive when compared to scout rifle TTKs. The only issue is that because it shoots a burst of 2 bullets, it has recoil. And with mouse and keyboard, recoil compensation is not only easier, but there is less recoil. However, the advantage of using a controller is that you get aim assist. So ultimately, since the second bullet of the Graviton Lance doesn't have drop-off, a controller is limited around 70 meters because the recoil compensation becomes impossible for even a good player. Now, it can definitely be mastered for a single burst, but if you're trying to go for the 3-tap or the 4-tap, every single successive shot you shoot at max rate of fire, bloom increases, making the recoil compensation harder for each successive shot. When I put this in English, basically, as long as you just spam body shots as fast as humanly possible, it's probably more realistic of getting a kill than actually trying to aim and compensate for recoil at that 70-meter mark. Polaris Lance, on the other hand, has perks that add to very controllable recoil. At 85 meters, it experiences slight drop-off and extends all the way to 96 meters, where past that, you can no longer 4-tap. But honestly, there aren't many engagements in Destiny that go past 96 meters, so I think you're good. Next up, we'll be taking a look at the weapon's perks. Graviton Lance has fitted stock, which makes the weapon more stable but heavy. Cosmology, kills with this weapon cause enemy targets to detonate and spawn void projectiles that track your enemy. Accurized rounds, which increase range. Hammerforged rifling, which increases range. And Black Hole. Second shot of a burst rips through space-time, doing high damage and recoil with no fall-off. And finally, it's Catalyst, which gives you better target acquisition, aka even more range. So don't think of it as a pulse rifle, but rather a glorified scout. Speaking of scouts, here we got Polaris Lance with fitted stock, which really helps stability and recoil. Zen Moment, landing a shot increases its stability. Tactical Mag, increases stability and magazine size. Small bore, which increases range and stability. And finally, the Perfect Fifth. Precision hits return ammo to the mag. Landing 4 precision hits loads a delayed solar explosive round for your next shot. It's only temporary though. The Perfect Fifth lasts for about 5 seconds. As you can tell by the image on screen, comparing Cosmology to the Perfect Fifth is like comparing apples to oranges, because one of them requires a kill and the other does not. This is very advantageous when you consider that in the competitive playlist, every time you peek, you may not get a kill. But if you get a headshot, you can backpack the Perfect Fifth. And in PvE, if you're trying to do boss damage, well, you never killed the boss in a couple of bursts, it's going to take a lot of bullets, so therefore you'll proc the Perfect Fifth multiple times, whereas with Graviton Lance, you'll just, have a better than average pulse rifle. But now, assuming that you're going for a kill with both of the weapons, Cosmology has a bigger radius. So Graviton Lance, when you land the kill, is more effective of a radius than the Perfect Fifth or Firefly, the catalyst that exists on Polaris Lance. Right now in PvP, something that people often complain about is team shot meta and holding hands. Well, the Graviton Lance sort of solves that, because if you get a kill, it creates a void explosion. It explodes for 50 damage within 5 meters and 85 damage within 3. That's nearly half somebody's health. And then when you consider the Axion darts hit another 10 damage each and it spawns 2 of them, that's half their health. The Axion darts also don't attack immediately. They sort of delay and wait around and then hit people, so it hinders their recovery. And finally, the icing on the cake is that if the explosive damage or the Axion darts kill a target, the explosion can chain, therefore creating another explosion, which then has another chance to chain. So if people are standing next to each other, especially within that lethal 3 meters, you might kill the entire squad in one pulse rifle burst. The one big thing about cosmology though is that it is inconsistent. It doesn't work the same every single time. This contrasts pretty nicely with the Polaris because perfect 5th radius is very consistent and Firefly is always consistent. And in the current meta where people wormhusk at every available opportunity, the perfect 5th hits incendiary damage, which sends 5 ticks of 6 damage, therefore delaying the healing. But it seems that the price you pay for consistency is the fact that the explosion kills do not chain. So keeping everything I just mentioned in mind, let's get down to a verdict. Which weapon is better? It pains me to say it, but considering the ease of obtaining, the TTK consistency, the range, and the explosive punishment to handholding, I have to give it to the Graviton Lance. But I'm happy to report that it was actually a closer fight than I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the season. When I tried Graviton Lance for the first time, I'm like, oh, this is unbeatable. Nothing's going to be better than this. And I was mostly right. And Vigilance Wing came along and almost dethroned it in my eyes, but then I really started using Polaris Lance in competitive and realized that a guerrilla warfare playstyle worked really well with it. Because if you get a headshot, then run away, you're living, and you're 1/4 of the way to the perfect 5th. If you stop yourself at 3 headshots, and then on the 4th headshot, be prepared to go for the kill, you can 3-tap a person, dropping the effective TTK to 0.9. To be more specific, it's not an actual 0.9, but you're only going to be exposed for 0.9 seconds, and then you can hide and cover while they burn out. I specifically mentioned the strength of this gun in the competitive playlist because it really does lend to winning in competitive. In Countdown, it's elimination. You only get 1 life unless you get revived, and a lot of the engagements aren't to the death initially. It's sort of just to prod and peek at where your opponents are and get information. And in that instance, you could be stacking some headshots up. And once you have 3 of them, that's when you commit to the kill with your team. It is very strong because it doesn't require a kill to get the same effectiveness of Kill Clip. So that's my closing thoughts. With less than a week to obtain the Redrix's Claymore, the Season 3 competitive reward, give Polaris Lance a try. You might just enjoy it in the competitive playlist. But now looking into the future of Season 4, I speculate that not every weapon will scale the same. So a hand cannon might change from a 4-shot kill to a 3-shot kill, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a pulse rifle will change from a 3-burst to a 2-burst. Or that doesn't necessarily mean that a scout rifle will change from a 5-tap to a 4-tap, and so on. But I do suspect that the Polaris Lance might actually 3-tap. So keep this in mind moving into Season 4 because Polaris Lance might really be the sleeper meta.